Welcome to The Bank Tellers, where we will be speaking with senior leaders from across the banking industry all around the world. I am your host today, Scarlett Sieber. I am our Chief Strategy and Growth Officer here at Money 2020, and we have a fabulous episode, if I do say so myself. We have Clare Cusack, who is the President and CEO of the New York Bankers Association, with us today. So, Clare, thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Outside of the fact that we have the same alma mater, although you have a JD in front of yours and a BA in front of mine, but just taking that fact out of there, two lovely ladies here in New York, I'd love to, for those, our ecosystem knows what the NYBA is, but for the people who don't, can you just explain what the New York Bankers Association is?
Sure. First of all, I'm thrilled to be here. Thrilled to meet you in person, finally. We've been back and forth on LinkedIn a ton. So the New York Bankers Association, founded in 1894, it's 130 years old this year. And we represent every bank from the smallest one branch bank on the border of Canada that deals in agriculture and skiing, all the way up to and through the largest financial institutions in the world who are based here in New York. And basically what we do, our number one priority is advocacy, government relations, and representing all of the banks from Albany to Washington to right here in New York City to really anywhere we're needed, and really advocating for a strong banking industry that can serve their communities. And then we also work in professional development, in vendor partnerships, all the things that a typical trade association would do. Our mantra is commitment to community, and that is a commitment to community to all of our banks, about 125 of them here in New York. And that is inspired by the banks themselves having a commitment to each of the communities they serve all the way through New York.
And you've been, first of all, thank you for that. That was super helpful. You've been with the New York Bankers Association now for a decade plus, general counsel, now president and CEO. What has been the thing that's been most surprising during your time at the New York Bankers Association, from where you were to where you are now?
I think for me, the surprising thing, and it's the thing that I work on the most, is the story that's told about banks to the public is very different than what's happening on the ground for banks day to day. But really what's truly happening for banks, for every size, every region, every charter, they are committed to the communities that they are in. They're serving them. They're making dreams come true through mortgages, through small business lending, through PPP during the pandemic. And I think that's something that, to be honest, I wasn't as aware as I should have been as when I first came in almost 13 years ago. But as I've worked with them, I've come to know them, and they're some of the kindest and greatest people I've ever met. So.
Oh, that's lovely. And I like even the one that you set up on the border of Canada, the skiing one. My Colorado gene started going there. I was like, yeah, I want to know that one. Which one's your favorite of the 125?
Oh, I never choose among the children. Never.
They're all there. They all have different opportunities, which I think it's lovely. What is when you go into that example that you gave with the one branch versus some of the largest ones? When you go in and you have conversations with the executive team, how do you approach those? Is it the same when you're talking to the one branch as the big ones down in New York City?
For the most part, yeah. Banking is banking. And so, I just yesterday was in the Hudson Valley visiting a bank in Wallkill, New York. And the first question is always, how's it going? How's the bank? What can we do? How can we be a better resource for you? And that answer will be different probably each time. But that's our job, is to be a representative of all of them, unified voice for the industry. Which can be a little bit like herding cats sometimes, but truly they, for the most part, have all the same mission and goals in mind, and that's to serve their customers and their employees and their communities.
Are you hearing? So that's super helpful, and I think that is amazing, the role that you and the NYBA are playing. Is there consistencies in the ask when you do ask those questions? What is it that they need help with right now, from like a fintech tech perspective?
Oh, I think the regulatory burden on banks of every size and every charter, every region is overwhelming, whether you're a tiny little bank or a large one. I hear stories from the larger ones where their compliance teams have doubled, tripled, quadrupled in the last 10 years just because of the regulatory burden that's on them. That's not to say that regulation is bad, but when you are, what happens when it comes to tech and fintech, if you want to focus on that, is the world is innovating around us and we're being tamped down by the regulatory environment that we're in the name, good intention, of protecting consumers. But when that happens, you end up actually boomerangs back and hurts consumers, because what will happen is what would you do in that situation if your bank is telling you they can't do something? You're going to go outside of the regulated banking system and you're going to find another solution for yourself. And so I think that's where there's a huge focus right now on the balance between regulatory good intention and innovation, and really getting to a better and more modern banking world.
I'm happy you went there. This was going to be a rapid fire question, but let's just go there now while we're on the topic of regulation and policy. If there was one regulation or policy that you could change today that would really impact your members, what would it be?
There's so many to choose from. I would say overall, I would sort of reiterate what I just said, and that's just fine. When you're talking about regulation and when you're talking about public policy and protecting consumers, you also have to think about what's going to happen if you're regulating human behavior, you're probably regulating the wrong thing. And so I would say it's probably those things. If it's something about, how back office operations goes, okay, we can talk about it. But regulating human behavior and trying to stop a consumer from doing what they're naturally going to do and blaming it on the bank is something that is very. I'm trying to think of a good example of that, but that is where I would go on it. And there's so many out there. And again, I think the other thing that happens, and that is probably maybe more overarching than one specific, is you've got so many different regulators, and they're not nobody's got their eye on the ball and seeing the confluence of what all these regulations are doing. There's no sort of quarterback in the room saying, okay, CFPB is doing this, OCC is doing this, the state regulators this, the state attorneys general doing this. Who's overseeing that and saying, oh, wait a minute, we've gone too far in this space? And some of that, I think, to be completely fair, is a reaction to what happened in March of last year, and a sort of, we've got to, do better at regulating and keeping an eye on some of our banks. Oh, true, that's true, but also true is, when you put that kind of burden on, a large bank, but like J.P. Morgan Chase, is going to have a very different effect on a small bank like the one bank branch on the border of Canada. And a lot of times they're equally just dropping on them like that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And as you said, consumers are going to do what they do, and it's important that we protect them. But at the same point in time, we spend a lot of time looking at the convergence of all of these things, and some fintechs, and they've gotten better at this, but could be a bit misleading. And so they think that they have the trust that comes with a bank, but they don't necessarily have that. And so we've got quite a long way to go there, I would say. When you look back at I love that it's your 130-year anniversary. Mm-hmm. When you look back at, even in the almost 13 years that you've been with the NYBA, has there been any like truly defining moments that have kind of got you to where you are now, either when you were here or before your time?
Oh, there's so many. There's literally a book written about our association going through each banking crisis, which happens, every couple of decades, including 2008, which I would say, in terms of my own experience, I was working in a law firm at the time, but that was obviously a hugely defining moment for the banking industry. But for me, particularly in my role, I took the role as CEO in December of 2020. Great timing in the middle of everything that's going on. But I really do think the pandemic was a shapeshifter for the banking industry. I talk about how, banks, a lot of them, not all of them, the larger ones were much more along the way, but a lot of our smaller community banks, even some of the regional banks, were just getting into the digital space. And so it was like their 5-year plans for digital went to 5-day plans, and they had to change right away. And I watched and we were supportive the whole time, just sort of getting every bit of information we can get out to them. I watched as teams from the back room were coming in and picking up the phone on the call center and really like absolutely there every minute for their customers. They never left their desks. They were, there was no work from home for a banker. And they put themselves in harm's way, got that PPP program rolling. If you remember, PPP was announced on a Friday night at a random press conference. Nobody knew it was coming, and it was going to be put into place on a Monday. And it was very vague guidance that came out. I'm not blaming anybody. It was the middle of a pandemic, and it was crazy times. But they literally were told, this is coming out on Monday, and we expect the money to be dried by Monday night. And so they all 24/7 were calling every customer, making sure everybody, and for the most part, something like 90% of those loans are free and clear now, and they saved so many small businesses in that time. So to me, that was the marker, not only of me taking over as the role as CEO, but also of sort of the next chapter of who we are as bankers and who we are as an association.
Yeah, it's easy now in 2024 at times to forget about those moments. And I remember at that time, it was slightly before this role, and I was advising a lot of the 2 to 20 billion AUM banks and credit unions across the U.S., and we were having these conversations. And then even for us, being a small business, going through the process, and that time was absolutely crazy. And it's easy to get lost some of those moments and the people that were really doing the work in the back end. You talked about the compliance piece, which makes a ton of sense, and those are the conversations that you're having with your members. When you're speaking with them about the future, and we talked about the acceleration of digital, as an ex-CIO, banks love to talk about innovation. Mm-hmm. So are there any key things that you're seeing, consistently when you're talking to them? Like, what are they thinking about when they're thinking about doing innovation inside these organizations?
Oh, I think like any industry, everybody is AI all the time right now. Everybody wants to talk about how can it make our operations more efficient? How can we talk about preventing fraud? I think, let me be very clear here, how do we use AI for good and prevent it for bad? And so everybody trying to get a handle on where we're going to go with it and what's going to happen with the banking industry. But again, I think this is another inflection point where we have to be really careful. I'm very focused on building a more diverse and equitable and inclusive financial system for all. I say it all the time. So let's make sure if we're using this tool, all of that is built in as well, and we're not relying on information that was built by one sector or one population. So I think we're all kind of getting our hands or our brains wrapped around that at the moment.
So that's not surprising at all. One fun fact for you. So one of the things that we do is we have a call for content process every year where anyone can submit essentially their desire to speak on our stages. The U.S. has roughly 2,000 applications. Almost 20% of them talked about the combination of AI and fraud from the industry. So that was from banks, from fintechs, from whatever. So what you're hearing and seeing is definitely true across the industry, and it's not just the banks who are thinking about that, but we did get plenty of submissions, some probably from your members, in fact. But with that, so just to double down on that, when they were talking about AI, because there's obviously many applications of it, do you see most of the use cases right now focusing on back of the house or front of the like for the end consumer?
I mean, I think everybody's talking about chatbots, and that's the easiest thing you can think of when you think of AI. But I see a lot of back office, and risk management is really the other part of it. I think it's no surprise to hear this fraud is rampant, right? And it's, again, this is one of those things where you're trying to control human behavior, which is really, really hard. Trying to teach as much as you can about, scam calls and scam emails. The other thing that is totally crazy right now is check fraud, which you think, like, who's even using checks anymore? But yeah, check fraud is huge. We actually had a presentation with the NYPD and the FBI about which pens are good to use on checks. Do you know which ones are?
No.
Not bank pens. Apparently, they're the worst ones. The bank pens that you get when you fill something out in the bank are the worst ones. Great. But gel pens, anything that's made, there's a very certain one I can find out and let you know, but there's a very certain one. If you write in gel pen, it's very hard. They literally take some kind of acid and wash the check so that there's no print on it, and then they fill it in any way that they want. So gel pens, it doesn't work. Little life hack for everybody that's listening.
There you go. We came in to talk about innovation in banking. We got a life hack for all every days.
That's like, going backwards a little bit, but yeah.
You know what? It is and it isn't. It's so funny. So when this is like a decade ago, but it's still relevant. When I first joined at BBVA, which is a large Spanish bank mainly in Texas, so not in your neck of the woods, but we had a startup competition. We had applications from all over the world. Anyways, long story short, there was a bunch of companies focusing on the digitization of checks, and my colleagues in Spain were like, "What? Why? This doesn't make, like, come on, it's at that time 2015 or whatever." I'm like, it really matters still. It's still a big issue in the U.S. So,
but if you think about it, sorry, I harp on this stuff. If you think about it, like think about today, if we created something called a check and it has your name, your address, maybe your phone number, your bank account number, and you're just sending it through the mail. I mean, that's crazy if you think about it. So it is something that could be a lot better securitized.
It's the PPI on that is insane. I used this example in an article that I wrote during the pandemic, to your point of like the acceleration of digital within a few days. So my mother-in-law, who's very close to me, so she got on Venmo because all of her girlfriends got on Venmo. So she's in her 70s, right? And she one of her friends, they were doing like this virtual choral thing because they couldn't be in person. And so she went to send her money because they were, all donating to this cause. Long story short, I forget the lady's name. It was Sue or Karen or something like that. But she gave her money on Venmo like 3 times. And it was like a very common name, like a Sue Smith. And so she's asking me, she's like, hey, Scarlett, can you see she actually figured out how to get Venmo herself, was sending money. It was clearly not, so her friend was just like, oh, it's Sue Smith, but it's like Sue Smith 136 or one of these
a million
things.
Sue Smiths.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, of course, then I go on and I'm trying to talk to the lady and I'm like, hey, sorry, like I didn't mean to send this money, but we never got the money back.
Of course.
But that type of stuff happens all the time. And there is a psychological component of it as well, because we want to your point originally on doing what's best for the end consumers, whether those be small businesses or humans, like end of day humans, it's hard because she was feeling a type of way because you don't want to feel like you don't know what you're doing, so you kind of try to do it, and then in the meantime, you could end up getting hurt. So it definitely happens. When you're thinking about and when you're talking to your members, I hear AI. Is there any other like specific technologies that they're investing in and they're focusing on? Is there like some consistencies on that side as well?
So one thing that I'm sure you are familiar with and have heard plenty of times, in fact, we had a Hudson Valley region meeting yesterday. Whenever you talk about technology, you talk about your core provider. It's just how they think. So does my core provider allow for this technology to come in? And one of the things that I'm so glad I'm talking to you today, because I have been trying since December 2020, since I started, to figure out a way to get the fintechs and the banks in the same room. So we've run a bunch of different trial balloons on that, tried to run a conference that we were calling Bank Tech Connect, and we had every single fintech you can imagine want to join and be an exhibitor at it, and a couple of banks, because I think it's just overwhelming, right? And so we're trying to figure out a way to get the conversation going, whether it's in products that are already developed, or maybe it's just a matter of instead of the products being presented, the banks presenting the issues that they have and that they need solutions for. So we're sort of going in that direction now, sort of reversing the idea of having a presentation on, let me see if my thing fits your bank, as opposed to the bank saying, this is what I need and what do you have that can fit that, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. We have a VP of FinTech strategy who should be thinking about this and how Money 2020 can help facilitate this, because there is some short answer is you're 100% right. It's something that we see, talking about the cores. It's interesting because they're actually a really crucial part of our ecosystem. So we had Stephanie Ferris from FIS keynote last year. We have Frank from Fiserv keynoting this year. So they play a role in that, but of course, all the new next-gen cores are there as well. But it is, we do this balance where there's certain people, especially some of those who are like technologically advanced, who are coming to the show and they know exactly who they want to meet, and they just are looking at the different providers and doing some, due diligence. Other ones don't know what they want, but they know that they have a problem, and that can feel really overwhelming. So let's work on this together.
Yeah,
I think
I would love to.
We can help. We can help solve that. So we're gonna switch gears now into Clare. Okay.
Oh.
So
I can talk about banks all day. I don't know about me.
It's important because you're here as part of this. So when you think about your career, what is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Oh, there's a lot of really good advice I've gotten over the years. I would say my friend Derek Weinkoop, he's the CEO of Walden Savings Bank in Walden, New York. When I first took the role, so it's December 2020, I want to go meet all our members, and I can't. So I'm just getting on the phone, doing a listening tour, which was so annoying. But I got on the phone with everybody, and Derek said to me, I had taken the role after the person before me, a man named Mike Smith, who had the role for 40-something years before I was there, and he is a legend. I shouldn't say was. He's still with us and still a good advisor for me. But he just legendary. Everybody knew Mike Smith. Everybody knew who he was when he walked in the room, and it was very intimidating when I first started. And when I talked to Derek during my listening tour, he said, "Look, I took my CEO role after a legend too." And everybody kept coming up to me and saying, "You have big shoes to fill. You have big shoes to fill." And he said, "I'm here to say you have your shoes to fill. And stand in who you are. You got this for a reason. And trust your gut and keep moving forward." And it's sort of like you're afraid, you strap that fear on your back and you keep going, and you make your path and your impression on this organization. And it's stayed with me ever since, through some times when I didn't believe it after a while, but it's probably the best thing I've heard. Just be who you are in the moment, because you're here for a reason. You wouldn't have been chosen if you weren't.
I love that. Well, let's talk about you a little bit more. Yeah. You, with your general counsel law background, what do you think about that has prepared you most for the role that you're in right now?
Oh, wow. So I'll tell you a little personal story here. When I got the general counsel role, I was like, kicked my feet up. I'm good. I don't have to do anything else. This was the pinnacle of my career as a lawyer. And then the door opened for the CEO, and they asked me if I wanted it. And the door opened, you got to go through. And I think, what has helped me the most, even before the general counsel role, I had worked in state government. I had worked as like the assistant to the assistant's assistant in the state assembly. And that was a big advocacy role. As a lawyer, I was a securities industry litigator, so some of that financial background. And I think the two it's amazing, just married perfectly to come into this role. I started out doing government relations for New York bankers, then got the general counsel role, and then took this. So I think it's just a matter of kind of the thread that went all through my life: public service, being a trusted advisor, and being strategic in my approach. And that's just helped me all the way through, and it helps me now.
When you look at the next 12 months, because the last 4 years have been very intense, when you look at the next 12 months, what would you say, if you could pick one priority for the NYBA, what would it be?
I think it's, again, with the focus on us on government relations and advocacy. We don't know what's going to happen in November, and our mission doesn't change whatever does happen. But I think for me, it goes back to what I was saying. The story of banking is so different than what I experience. The story in the public is so different from what I experience, and I'd really like to build that a whole lot more. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding, particularly in the state legislature, over what we do, how we are legislated, how we are regulated, and how we actually have very common goals to protect consumers, to serve consumers, and to create, like I said, a equitable and inclusive financial system for all. And I think that's totally doable, especially in the financial capital of the world. I can't imagine a better place to figure that out than here.
Completely agree on that one. When you think about, what advice would you give someone who wants to be Clare when they grow up?
Well, as you can imagine, no surprise here, I didn't dream of being a banking association CEO when I was a child. But I think it's just, I've done a lot of different things. I just described. I did government advocacy. I've gone to law school. I worked in a big law firm. I worked in a university for a while. I've done government relations. And each time, I always thought like somewhere along the way, everybody was told what they were supposed to do, and I was never told that. So each time I had to change my role, I thought I failed at that role. But I think your path is your path because it's your path. And so looking back, I think if I could give advice to anybody that's sort of feeling that right now, it's that just build on the things that you do in each different role, and they will culminate in what you're supposed to be doing. And so I just think I was so hard on myself at those times, but it all worked out just fine. And so I guess that would be my advice. Just keep moving forward. Forward is forward. I always say that.
I love that. So you mentioned that when you were a little girl, this is not what you dreamed of. So what if you were not doing this, completely different career outside of banking, what would you be doing?
Aside from like every Hallmark movie, moving to some small town and opening a bakery that doubles as a dog sanctuary. I went to, when I was in college, I started advocating for the State University of New York. I went to SUNY Geneseo, very proud graduate. And so I started advocating because I was a junior, and about halfway through the year, the state announced that they were going to cut funding to SUNY in half or something like that. And that meant that tuition was going to have to double. And I knew people that were juniors in college that were not going to be able to finish one more year because they couldn't afford it anymore. And I found that so inherently unfair that I started advocating while I was in college, then desperately went to Albany to try to fix Albany. Imagine that, 21-year-old, how many years ago. But I truly believed that I could do something good. And so I think I had every intention of going to law school and coming back to Albany and doing that again. So I think if there was anything else I would do, it's public service. Not run for office, I know too much, but definitely public service. And I think in a lot of ways I'm still doing that. And that's, I'm doing it for a specific industry now and trying to make that sector better for the sector and better for the state as well. So.
Incredible. By the way, I know the town for you. It's where I grew up, Durango, Colorado. You can do the bakery and the dog sanctuary. I mean, we have it all there. So it's the Hallmark
and skiing.
movie. That as well, skiing. I grew up 10 minutes from Purgatory. So
I love it.
You have it all right there. So whenever you decide to switch it up, we got your spot. I know some people. When you think about your leadership style, this is a hard question. Mm-hmm. If you were to describe your leadership style in 3 words, what would you say?
Oof. Can I tell a little story, or do you want my 3 words? So when I first started this, I'm the first female to have this role in 130 years.
Yeah.
And I'm very proud of that. But I'm often the only female in the room. And when people would ask me this before, I would try to think of like the most strong words so that it would not seem like I was all that different. I work with a coach. I'm not afraid to say it. I love her and I adore her. And we were talking about this, just randomly talking about this the other day. And she said, strong can be some female kind of things too. And I think one of the strengths of women in leadership roles is their empathy and their ability to be compassionate. So that's probably my number 1 word, but in the same sense, have boundaries and be strong. So empathetic, but strong. And then strategic is my other word, I would say. We've done a lot in the last 4 years to turn around our organization, and really, I call us the 130-year-old startup because we're constantly changing and trying to become a better resource for our members in new and innovative ways.
That's incredible. My team knows as we talk about this a lot. In general, I think as a society, we truly undervalue the emotional intelligence, which empathy is a big part of that. And so much of getting business done and getting what you want done is understanding the other side of the table. Yeah. And whether that be internal or external, there's a lot to be learned there.
Yeah.
What's the first app that you check when you wake up in the morning?
Oh, this is embarrassing because I think it's the trend is done, but I'm still a Wordle crazy person. I still want to beat that Wordle bot every day. So I'm a Wordler.
Did you play sports when you were growing up?
Some, yeah.
Okay.
Super competitive though.
I
can
tell.
do.
I can. Yes. Okay.
Like I will take up running, and I had to run the New York City Marathon. I can't just dabble. It's kind of a problem.
Yes. We're two same types right there. That's what I was asking, because you have an athlete vibe to your energy when it comes to competition. Very last question. You have the collective ecosystem of money listening and watching this today, whenever today is for whoever's watching this. That's what's great about digital. What one ask do you have for them?
Oof, that's a good question. I think we're all doing it in our own way, and it goes back to what I was saying. I talk about New York as the progressive capital of the world and the financial capital of the world, and that's not totally different. I'm not saying that the banking industry should be progressive, but we can all work towards a more diverse, more inclusive, more equitable financial system there's no reason why we can't be working with, marginalized communities on building wealth and generational wealth that's only going to help all of us. So I would say that's my goal for me, and I would hope it's the goal for everyone. I think everyone has that somewhere in the back of their head. No one's trying to cut anybody out. There's plenty to go around for all, and it will only benefit all of us if we can build that together.
Amazing. Another beautifully said, as if you had scripted it, but she doesn't have any papers in front of her for anyone who wants to know, so that came straight from the head. Clare Cusack, the president and CEO of New York Bankers Association. That is it for Bank Tellers today. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.